Thanks for taking a short break from the water slide bill next door. I know it's been riveting. We're here today to present our alternative to the Republican tax plan. We have long said we are not against responsible changes to Missouri's tax code. What we don't want to do is continue to go down the same path that they have in the past sessions. There's no reason to be irresponsible and drive a huge hole in Missouri's budget to benefit corporations. Representative Carpenter has been working over the interim with many people to refine this to where he has right now. He filed the bill a little while ago. It's something that's going to give a tax cut to 99% of Missourians, not just to corporations, but to actual middle-class Missourians. And we think that that's the right direction to take. And before we answer any questions, I'll let John go ahead and give us an overview.
Thanks. As a caucus, Democrats agree that tax reform is important and necessary in the state of Missouri. In fact, I tend to think it's long overdue. We need to simplify and modernize our tax structure here in the state, and that's what this bill, House Bill 1328, will do. As Representative Hummel mentioned, it gives a tax cut to 99% of Missourians, while focusing that tax relief on actual everyday people, rather than sweeping 50% tax cuts for businesses and the largest corporations in Missouri, which is what we saw in the tax proposal last year, and is what we're seeing already in terms of bills that have been filed in this legislative session. This is a bill that modernizes the tax structure, which hasn't been adjusted for inflation since decades and decades ago, meaning under the current system, everybody earning more than $9,000 per year, that is to say minimum wage, pays the highest tax rate in the state. Now, decades ago, that made sense because $9,000 a year was the top income tax bracket. Today, it doesn't make sense anymore. This modernizes the system, creates 3 new brackets, which result in 99% of Missourians receiving a tax cut. But importantly, the bill is also revenue neutral. This was another major problem with House Bill 253 last year, and frankly, from what we've seen filed already this year, looks like it's going to be as big or bigger of a problem. That is to say, cutting hundreds of millions of dollars out of the state budget, out of general revenue, will, without question, have negative ramifications on a number of state services, most notably education. This bill, because it's revenue neutral, doesn't have that risk. And yet at the same time, we're able to provide tax relief to the overwhelming majority of Missourians. It's for these reasons that I think we can refocus the debate this year on a more fiscally responsible approach to tax reform. And I hope that House Bill 1328 can be the bill that we look to for that alternative. And happy to answer any questions.
By being revenue neutral, that implies that someone must be getting a tax increase to offset those who are receiving a tax decrease. So can you speak about who's getting an increase here?
Sure. So the new brackets under this bill would be from $0 to $30,000 would be taxed at 4%. So that's a tax cut on the first $30,000 of income for everybody. This is graduated income tax structure. So everybody on the first $30,000, whether you're making $30,000 or you're making $330,000, is going to see a tax cut there. Between $30,000 and $300,000 in income, it's taxed at the same rate as it is in the status quo, which is 6%. And above that, for folks making over $300,000 a year, we ask them to pay a little bit more with a tax rate of 8%. We also adjust the income tax deduction that's offered for federal taxes by lowering the cap, which also generates some new revenue for the state to help keep the bill revenue neutral.
Lowering the cap to what? Lowering the cap on that to what?
To $2,000 for an individual or $4,000 for a married couple.
Okay, so your 4% rate is the rate that everybody at the bottom is going to pay. Currently, if I have a tax return in which I have $6,000 of taxable income, that means that I probably made about $15,000 or $17,000 over the course of the year in wages. And I pay $165 in taxes. Under your plan, I pay $240 in taxes. Tell me how you eliminate the liability for that extra $75, which you're now imposing as a tax increase on the poorest.
Right, so that's just not the case. The bill includes a tax deduction for folks making less than $15,000 per year. That tax deduction ranges between $500 and $2,500. Every Missourian in that range and any other range, all the way up to $300,000, will receive a net tax cut. Whether you're making $5,000, $10,000, or even $250,000 a year, you'll receive a tax cut under this bill.
Do you have a fiscal note for this thing?
Well, the bill has just been filed today, but under consultation with experts and also people in fiscal oversight here at the Capitol, we feel that the bill will be revenue neutral or very close to it. It's going to be within 1% of current GR, which is about $8.5 billion. So whereas House Bill 253 last year and already the proposal we've seen from Senator Krause this year would cut well over 10% of GR out of the state budget, this is going to be within 1% either direction. So we feel comfortable calling it revenue neutral.
But you don't have a document that lays out how
Right, the bill has just been filed today, but again, that's numbers from the tax expert community here in Missouri and also from fiscal oversight here at the county.
Let me raise a question I'm sure Republican opponents are going to raise, but this is a bill that essentially is Robin Hood, takes from the rich, gives to the poor, provides a higher tax rate for lower income, higher taxes on higher income. True or false?
The bill certainly asks people at the top to pay more than people at the bottom, but frankly, that's what the progressive income tax in this country is. That's how it was designed in Missouri when it was first instituted decades ago. It's only because it hasn't been adjusted for inflation in Missouri that everybody, including folks making minimum wage, people making $10,000 a year in this state pay the same tax rate as people making $10 million a year. I don't think that's right. I think that a progressive income tax structure makes sense. And asking the folks at the very top to pay a little more, I think has broad-based support in this state, and I think is the right thing to do.
There's nothing at all in this bill that deals with businesses.
So that's kind of a common misconception. The vast majority of businesses in the state of Missouri report their income on their personal income. And the vast majority of small businessmen and women in Missouri earn less than $300,000 per year. So the vast majority of small businesses will, in fact, get the same tax cut that any individual would get in the bill.
It would seem that this bill, if I can anticipate some of the criticism, is that you're now going to destroy jobs because you're taking money away from the job creators. We hear so much about that by giving them a tax break, they're now going to go hire a bunch of people. How is this going to help get more people more jobs?
Yeah, so two things. One, as we just mentioned, the vast majority of businesses are going to get a tax cut under this bill. The overwhelming majority of small businessmen and women earn less than $300,000 per year. Every one of them will get a tax cut if this were to become law, and I hope that it does.
And Rudy, if I can add something, I think the Republican train of thought is, well, if we cut taxes for the super rich and the job creators, that then it will trickle down. We don't believe that. We think that by raising people's wages and their standard of living, that actually helps the job creators. We'll put more money back into the pocket of everyday Missourians and allow them to purchase the products that they then make.
Do you have any assurances that you're going to get assigned to a committee?
Well, we're very hopeful that it will. If we want a serious look at tax reform this year, which I hope that we do, then just doing the same thing that we did last legislative session isn't going to result in anything actually getting done at the end of the day. If what we pass out of the House and Senate is another tax bill that cuts $800 or $900 million out of the state budget, then ultimately it's going to get vetoed, and nothing's going to become law. Nothing's going to change. If we want something serious to get done this year, then we need a fiscally responsible alternative to what happened last year, and I think this bill can be that that bill.
Does the governor support this bill? Have any of you talked with the governor about it?
Just filed the bill today and have not talked to the governor.
Is there a Senate sponsor lined up for the bill?
Like I said, just filed the bill today and look forward to seeing where it goes.
Have you worked with the governor's office on creation of this legislation at all?
I have not.
Why? I mean, if you guys wanted to see this passed, why would you work with the governor's office?
I think the first thing we have to do is try and get it to the legislature first. While I would appreciate the governor's input on this, and we will, trust me, we will be contacting his office, we need to get it to the legislature first before we get it to his desk.
But there has been no discussion with the guy from your party who holds the governor's office about this approach.
Not this one specifically. I think we all recognize the need for something to be done. Everyone has their own version of an idea. This is ours.
That has, you say not this one specifically, have there been discussions about a tax cut bill that would lower taxes for lower income, increase taxes in the higher income?
No, we have not had that discussion with the governor's office.
Have you guys worked with the speaker or Republicans on this bill at all?
No, to be fair, and they haven't worked with us on any of our bills either.
How much do you generate from the change in the deductibility of federal taxes?
Well, like I said, overall the bill is revenue neutral.
How much on that?
That component alone, it's $200 to $300 million.
And how much is, how much of the revenue, new revenue, because that's one of the new revenue sources. What about the 8% above 300 whatever thousand? How much money does that raise? Because that'll tell us how much you're cutting taxes for everybody else.
Right. Well, so these numbers, when you make the changes, they all intertwine with one another. So the federal tax deduction and the 8% and the low-income tax deduction all change when you change it. But what we do know is that by doing 8% on folks making more than $300,000 a year in conjunction with the cap on your federal tax deduction, that offsets the lost revenue by providing 99% of Missourians with an income tax cut.
Okay.
What is
the
the
figure
loss-
offset?
what-
You're going up by this much and down by this much, and you get back to zero, but what's that figure?
Which figure?
Well, how much is the tax increase or the tax cut? I know it balances out to about zero, but what are we talking about?
Well, you know, when you run the numbers, that's not exactly how you do it. What we do know is after you make all the changes, it's going to be revenue neutral. That's what
Can
we.
you share your calculations on this then? I mean, we don't have an official fiscal note, you obviously have not.
Yeah, I mean,
Haven't seen it advanced yet.
Here at the Capitol, they'll provide an official fiscal note forthcoming. At least I hope that they do. That's what they do on these kind of bills. Sometimes it takes some time, as you know, after you file the bill.
But, you know, on the change in federal deductibility, for those people who go from a 6% to a 4%, then they're gonna have a little bit more taxes that they would otherwise not pay. For those people who are going to 8%, the additional tax that they're paying because of that 8%, that only represents $240. And 8%.
What represents 240?
The $3,000 change in the federal deductibility is worth $240 at 8%. If you're taxing $100,000 at 8%, that's $8,000. So tell us, can you not tell us how much how much the 4% tax bracket cuts from state revenue? How much?
Well, it doesn't make sense to do it at 8% because right now it's at 6%. So right now when you get
2% additional revenue. So
That's right.
It's $2,000 out of every 100,000 that you're taxing.
That's right.
And it's $240 is the additional is the additional kick from the lowering of the federal tax deductibility.
Well, right, but that's right. But on your first $30,000 of income, and this is for everybody. Remember, this is a graduated income tax structure, just like it is at the federal level and in states across the country. On your first $30,000 in income, you're going to get a $375 tax cut. Everybody is. Everybody's going to get that $375. So even after you compensate with the federal tax deduction loss for higher income people, and it would only be for higher income people where they lose some of those dollars, they still receive a net tax cut.
So why aren't you willing to share Okay, the 4% rate does this to tax revenue. The 6% rate that we set, that we leave in place is this much, it does this to revenue. The 8% rate does that to revenue. He's just said the change in deductibility is $200 to $300 million. How come you can't give us those details?
But I don't have those numbers for you right now.
Come get them?
We can work on getting them to you.
In a bigger picture here, how much does this proposal indicate a shift in this building away from should there be a tax cut to what type of tax cut should we have?
Well, like I said, I think tax reform is important in this state. It's long overdue, frankly. We need to simplify and modernize our tax structure. Like we said before, asking people making $10,000 a year to pay the same tax rate as somebody making $10 million a year doesn't make a lot of sense. We just believe that, one, it should be fiscally responsible, and I think that's what the revenue neutrality of the bill provides. And two, we believe the tax cut ought to go to everyday hardworking Missourians, which is why 99% of actual individuals receive a tax cut under this bill. Whereas what we saw in last year's House Bill 253, the overwhelming majority of those tax cuts went to the biggest corporations and businesses in the state. Whereas your everyday individual got very little in the tax cut bill last year. In fact, this bill gives a bigger tax cut to actual Missourians like you and I than did House Bill 253 last year.
So what if the Republicans decided that they would offer a compromise and take your 4% rate and then add their corporate tax cuts? Is that a compromise?
Well, we'd certainly, first of all, I would love to sit down with the majority and discuss this if they'd be willing to do that. They haven't seemed very willing to do anything but whatever they feel like. So if they would actually decide to ask us our opinion on something, we'd be happy to try and work that out. But to go back to your point, as you said, year after year lately, there's been talk of cutting taxes for corporations, and we're not against responsible tax legislation. But what we think, what we in our hearts believe is it's not trickle down that works. It is our ability to put more money into the pocket of everyday Missourians, not the rich. And I think that's what this does. And I really have to support it. Any other questions?
Thank you.